Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Kevin. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you to the Coaches Academy Club for asking me on to present today. It's always great to be asked on to talk to fellow coaches and to share some ideas and thoughts that you have within coaching. So thank you very much for the invite, and also a massive thank you to everyone on the call who's kindly gave up some of their Friday afternoon to listen to me talk today. So hopefully from what we speak about today, there'll be a few things that you can go away and apply or certainly think about. That's certainly my hope for today, that you take a few things away and you're willing to try some of these things that you may have not put into practice yet. And what we want to really discuss and talk about today is how best we try to maximise individual development in order to fill players' full potential, and understand that there'll be many people on the call, all at different levels in relation to their coaching journey. You'll be operating within different clubs and they'll have their own different environments and processes and cultures. But as I said, hopefully today we can chat through some of these things, navigate them through together, and there might be some key things that you take away from today and that impacts on the players that you work with back at your clubs and back within your environment. A little bit of background on myself. I've been a coach now for over, how long will that be, 16, 17 years. I'm currently at a pro license level. I've recently graduated with that 2 years ago, I think it was now. And I'm currently the assistant coach of the women's team at Rangers and also the girls' academy manager. And this is my second time at the club. I previously held posts at Hearts doing a similar type role, being head of girls' and women's football there. And I was also at Manchester City for 2.5 years as the technical director for the girls and women's programme. So overall, those years of coaching and working within massive football clubs, I've managed to amass some experience of myself and some things that I think have worked best to try to develop individual players as well. So I'm going to share some of that with you today, but it's obviously important to highlight that these are my own views and not those of my current employers or previous employers. It's just simply things that I've picked up on the way, experimented on, used upon my own environments, and happen to think they're quite useful. So I'll move on just to the next slide. So just like I've touched upon, really the key objectives from today, we're just going to briefly touch upon why is it as coaches we perhaps don't focus as much on individual development as perhaps we should. Then share with you some tools, it's seven tools in total that might help fulfill a player's full potential, and give you some of those in action, just exploring a little bit more detail on how they might look on the ground within your club. The next question that I wanted to pose was, what are the barriers to us developing individual players? Why is it we don't dedicate as much time as we probably should? So I'm sure you can come up with other ones, but these are just some of the ones that I've came up with. So the first one for me is time constraints. Depending on your circumstances within your club, you might find that you're only training 2 sessions a week. You might only have 1 hour sessions, and the time becomes really precious and really limited. And there tends to be then more a focus on the team or units within the team in relation to obviously just looking at that individual and that person's individual development and requirements. Depending on the age and stage that you're working on, and again, perhaps maybe your culture within your own club, there might be a focus on, tactics, systems of play, getting results at the weekend, and there's a real short-termism rather than a long-term focus and player development priority. So that can obviously impact and influence how much time that we give up as coaches to individual development. Another barrier perhaps might be that it's a slow process. It tends to be quite laborious. It doesn't happen overnight, and we don't see that change in an instant. So it can take a lot of time to occur. That can impact on the motivation of not just the coach, but the player themselves. And quite often we give up on that task and we don't pursue that over a period of weeks and months because we see the progress is very slow, or indeed it stayed stagnant over a period of time. And just my experience, I've had a real positive experience with coach education, but probably on reflection, there's been very little on individual development of a player. It tends to be more about the team as a whole, whether that be from a technical, tactical point of view, and there's maybe not been as much. There's certainly been some, but certainly not as much information for the individual development of a player. And again, I appreciate that you're all coming from different countries and cultures, and indeed some of that may be different for you and your experiences. So that's just a few things that I see as potential barriers as of why we don't develop the individual player as much as we perhaps should. I'm now going to just spend a couple of slides just looking at some theories and some things that underpin some of the things that I'm going to speak about later on in the slides. And the first thing I wanted to speak about was the Bronfenbrenner theory. Well, this is an ecological approach where it's really understood and recognised that the player or the person at the centre of what we're trying to do, it's multifaceted. There's lots of layers to their environment, which has a massive impact and bearing on that development of that player, of that person, etc. So just from that simple diagram you see there, that if you put the person or player at the heart of it, surrounding them immediately will be influences from their teammates, from their peers, from family members, from coaches. And then you peel that back a little bit further and you've got other influences and interests that surround that person. And then obviously looking at them in their overall environment, you might have cultural influences and differences, their economic status, societal issues at the time, and obviously political consequences as well. So again, I'm not going to go too heavy on all this sort of stuff, and I've really put these next few slides for information and perhaps for you guys as coaches, if you're curious to go on and study them a little bit more. But hopefully as I talk through the presentation, some of these things will crop back up and you'll think, okay, I see how that links with that. As I said, I know it can be a little bit heavy, but for me, it's very important that we understand the context, we understand that they're people first, and we understand that there is lots of variables that occur, and it's not just simply coach and player relationships, but it's multifaceted, and there's so many complex systems in play that will ultimately impact on how we develop the players that we work with. Another one that I wanted to throw out, and again, it's quite a common one, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call are aware of it, the notion of the self-determination theory. This centres really around three key things of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So competence, obviously, the feeling of being able to feel that they're capable of doing the task that you set them. So setting them appropriate goals, that the person themselves feel that they can attain them, that they feel competent enough to obviously pursue that task and actually achieve that task. The feeling of autonomy, which I think is absolutely key and crucial, so that the players have a choice, which is fundamental, that they are able to think for themselves and prioritise themselves what they want to work on within a football context. And relatedness, so that idea of feeling connected to others and that sense of belonging, that really relates to the Bronfenbrenner theory that I just mentioned. The idea that there's complex layers, there's lots of interactions between different environments, and the ability to feel connected, not just to their teammates, but also to the coach, and to the task that maybe we set them in relation to their individual development. So if we have all those three things, then hopefully as a consequence of that, based on the theory, is that you're going to have far more higher levels of motivation and engagement, which hopefully will in turn then relate to then the players' development being better as a consequence as well, because of obviously the motivation and engagement levels are high. And the last one that I wanted to put out there was this concept of motivational interviewing, MI for short. This is something that I'm still navigating through, that I'm curious about, and I don't know a lot about it, and I won't speak a lot about it because I'm certainly not comfortable enough yet to go into any great detail. But this is a concept where, through the art of questioning, through the art of being curious and understanding that it's a partnership and it's not a one-way conversation with the player, that we can actually tease out of the players themselves a lot more meaningful feedback for us as coaches to act upon, but also letting the players then get to a point where they feel really engaged in the process. And I think for me, that's something, as I said, I'm trying to get a bit more grips with and hands-on with that and how that looks. And as I said, I would urge all of you just to have a look through those three key things, whether it be the Bronfenbrenner theory, the self-determination theory, or with motivational interviewing, and how that can maybe impact on your coaching practice and your interactions with the players that you work with currently. Okay, so I'm now going to go into 7 tools that I think that are important to help individualise a player's journey within an academy or within a team setup. First of all is individual development plans, which seems to be quite commonplace now across most clubs. Buddy up system, the idea of formal feedback, the concept of ghost coaching, the use of video analysis, scaffolding pre-activity tasks prior to training, and the use of parents as an additional support as well. So I'm going to go through all these very quickly, each slide, and how I would perhaps use them or how I have used them in the past with previous clubs and experiences that I've had as a coach. So the first one is individual development plans. This is, as I said, commonplace amongst most clubs. And really an IDP is a way of goal setting for a player. So I personally think that the best way of doing this is that the player themselves takes ownership of the plan. So that idea of autonomy that we spoke about earlier, and that they themselves rate where their strengths are and what areas that they feel they want to improve upon. So for this example that I've gave you here, is that you just break it into the 4 pillars of technical, tactical, physical, and psychosocial, and they maybe rate themselves of where they think they're at, what their main strengths are within those areas, and what are some of the key things that they would like to try to improve upon, and how they're then going to then do that. How's that then going to look in training and out with, and then maybe their own environment where they can practice a little bit more on those things. Then the coach, then the skill of the coach and the role of the coach then, hopefully through some of the motivational interviewing that I've touched upon, will then start to tease out more information and more ideas from the player themselves. And then together, and this is really important, that we co-create the plan. So although we're giving the player autonomy to drive it, I think it's very important that it's not just that the player does everything or the coach does everything. I think we have to get that idea of relatedness that we spoke about as well, and how it's connected and it's joined up together. So I think it's really important that those conversations occur, depending on the age and stage of your players. Obviously, that is with parents as well. And I think unless if they're adults, I would always recommend that the parents are part of that process and journey as well, which I'll touch upon later on. The last thing I would say about IDPs is that once they're created, they have to be a live document and they should live that way. So, it wouldn't be unusual for me to hear of clubs where they have an IDP plan at the start of a season and then they never revisit it until the end of the season. But at that point, the players then recognise and realise that you don't prioritise that as a coach. So why should they prioritise it within their learning? Motivation declines, etc., and very little growth or development then occurs. So for me, it's important that you are quite rigorous with this and you have it, maybe every 12 weeks, you would have these catch-ups with players and with their parents. And you would go through the goals that they've set, the practices that they've set, how that looks. And then potentially you would then go and set new targets, or you then may continue the targets that you want to work on. And then they would review themselves again 12 weeks at a time, and you just repeat that process. And that could maybe be 3 times within a season. Is probably quite adequate. So that's an IDP, and for me, this will form a lot of the stuff that we speak about later on. Really, without a concrete individual development plan for a player, I think it's very difficult to build upon that. So for me, this would be the cornerstone of individualising a player's journey within your team or within an academy setting. So the second one I want to talk about is the notion of formal feedback. And again, the formal feedback would really form, the IDP would really form the formal feedback part of this section. So as we discussed earlier, this would take place every 3 months or so. It really should relate not only to their IDP, but I think it's a great opportunity to understand the player themselves and how that then, things within their school environment, things within their family environment, and how that's maybe impacting on their football either in a positive way or maybe in a negative way. And if you have that relationship, I think that then really helps the relationship within you and your player grow. But then it also then, going back to the Brofenbrenner theory, it then gets you to understand some of the complex layers that exist there and how you can best support that person to develop. Ideally, if you are in a fortunate position and you have a multidisciplinary team made up of sports scientists, strength and conditioning coaches, physios, etc., they should all be part of that process as well, so that there's a wrap around the player and everyone understands everyone's roles and responsibilities within that individual and what they're trying to achieve. For some players, some physical focus might be a real priority for them and less the technical tactical. And in that case, the sports scientist or the strength conditioning coach may take a more active lead on that than the coach in that example. And if you don't have that luxury, then obviously the coach themselves would try to best act as much as they can around those 4 pillars. But underneath that or alongside that, there should also be that parental support. I think that's crucial, that the parent understands the journey that their child is going through, the goals that they have set themselves or it's been co-created with the coach, and how the parent can then best place to support that player along the journey at their time within the club. And again, I'll talk about the importance of parental support later on. And at that stage, after that 12-week review, you then might want to then assess that and set new goals if the player's really happy that they've attained a certain level and of competence and they feel that they've improved in that area, or indeed boredom is setting and they want to set themselves a new task. Then again, as discussed earlier, they can then co-create that with the coach, with the help of other staff members if that's appropriate, and certainly with the parent or guardian there as well. So that's another aspect of how we can prioritise individual feedback to make sure that we fulfil the player's full potential. The third one that I wanted to speak about was the role of ghost coaching. And in my experiences, what you tend to find is that there'll always be a lead coach on a session, and often the secondary coach is there just as a support and very rarely gets that involved in the session at that point, because it's the person that's leading the session's ideas and concepts at that given time. And I think we miss a trick in that. I think that with the role of the secondary coach or the ghost coach, I think the skill of them is then to go around the group and work with individuals and affect individuals as the session's then occurring. So it might be an hour-long session, and within that session itself, you're then getting individuals who then, you then get a ghost coach who pulls off those individuals at the side just for a couple of minutes. They could use a little bit of Q&A. They could provide a little bit of direct feedback. Ideally, if it relates to their IDP plan and their goals that they've set, then that's fantastic. That really shows a connection between the coach and the player, and us as a staff team then prioritising their individual development over everything else. But again, at the same time, it might just be a general coaching point as well to help inform that player or get the player to realise perhaps things that they could do better within the practice itself. So I think for me that's really crucial, and what that does is it gives a real clarity and role purpose for the ghost coach, and that the two coaches are working equally as hard as one another. One's more concerned with the overall team structure or unit structure of their team or their coaching practice, while the other one is really about affecting individuals. And hopefully by the end of the session, every single player within that squad has had at least 1 or 2 bits of information relating to them personally that they can take away and reflect on and hopefully grow and develop as a consequence. So for me, the role of the ghost coach is vital, it's really important, and I think it can really help to maximise a player's potential under your care. The next one that I wanted to speak about was the buddy system. This for me is quite an interesting one. So this is a concept where you as a coach could pair players together and they work together, again, over a period of time or however you see fit. And each of them have an understanding of what each other want to learn and their goals. So they might have actually shared with each other their individual development plan. So they understand what each other's plans are, what it looks like, and what their aims and ambitions are within that 12-week period. Not only does this then help build relationships, it builds trust, it maybe creates a little bit of vulnerability and psychological safety, where players are actually discussing with themselves, so this is how I see myself, this is where I rate myself, this is where I see areas that I need to improve on in my game. But it really empowers the players as well themselves to take ownership of each other's journey and it's not just relying on that kind of coach athlete relationship, but actually, again, it's that kind of co-athlete approach where they're leaning on each other and learning from each other. And in my experiences, it just fosters a far better culture, a learning environment for each other to learn and thrive on. And it's just a different voice. As often, I'm sure a lot of you will know that players sometimes can switch off from the coach giving information all the time, or if it's a parent giving information all the time. But sometimes if it comes from a peer, someone that they know within their team, then over a period of time that can have a massive impact as well. So for me, that's a really good example of it. And how that might work in real life is that you could be devising a training session, and you then create little opportunities for discussion. So, in between sessions or a little break between the practice that you're doing, guys, go and pair up, go and find your buddy and go and talk about some of the things that you're finding in relation to your IDP. Or you might set them a task. If, I want you to watch your buddy in this exercise. I want you to pay attention, in particular what they're looking to achieve in their IDP. And then we're going to ask you to then give some feedback in the next 5 minutes. So I think for me, that's really important. And it's not only them concentrating on themselves, but also concentrating on their teammates as well. And it's just building up a better knowledge for them without them probably even realising, and can have a bigger and greater impact if it's coming, as I said, from a peer rather than from a coach or someone that they would maybe see in a position of power. The next one is quite self-explanatory. It's just the use of video analysis. So if you're fortunate enough to have the resource of an analyst or someone who can film games and training, then great. It's a real obvious way of reviewing training. Players then can cut clips up and share that with coaches or share with their buddy and show each other and compare clips of how they're doing. But it can also be done in very low cost terms. Someone with an iPhone or an iPad or some other device that can go and film training or games. It can be equally just as good, like a GoPro cameras, all that sort of stuff can be really powerful. And giving feedback after the event is taking place, it allows time for reflection. It's obviously a great visual thing for kids and players to see. So that can have a real benefit as well. If you don't have access to any of that, then sometimes another simple task could just be that kind of role modelling task where there might be a Champions League game on that evening, or a big game, wherever that may be, and you might decide to set them a little task, and they could maybe watch players in their position or set them a certain task within the game, and they're watching some of the best players in the world doing that skill or how they're scanning or whatever it may be, and they can write down some interventions, observations that they've saw, and maybe from the back of that, can they then create some homework tasks for themselves? Can they then create a little practice that they can work on in their garden, down the park, or at training, which I'll come on to shortly as well. So again, the use of video is really powerful. I find it really useful for players to look back on, to review, to share with one another, to discuss and go through that. But also, if you don't have that, or on top of that, you can use that role modelling where you're really picking out some top individuals in the game that the young players can then learn from, that they can try to model some of those behaviours and then try to create little tasks on the back of that helps them then become a little bit better on the area that they would like to improve upon. So the next one I want to speak about is parental support. And I think for me, again, a lot of times football clubs can really undervalue or underestimate the impact that the parent can have. It's obvious that the parent is the massive influencer in the player's life, and I think for me we probably don't utilise that as much as we probably should. So what I mean by this one is that it's a great opportunity that if the parent is involved in the process and they understand what their child's IDP focus is, what their goals are for the next 12 weeks, then during training sessions, if they're attending, or during games, if they're attending, get them to write down notes. Let them take little tally mark scores or certain things that their child's trying to work on. And when there's breaks in play or breaks in training, go and get them out to their mums and dads and ask them, okay, mum, dad, how many passes did I make with my left foot? How many times did I scan before receiving the ball? And their mum or dad can have a little bit of paper there with some information on it, and they can run back to the coach and they can share that, or they can share that with their buddy as well. And then there's just that system is then complete. Everyone's involved in the process, whether it be coach, whether it be their teammates, whether it be themselves, and whether it be their parents. And I think for me, and it's my experiences, that's been a really powerful tool. What it also does as a consequence, it helps parents and indeed players focus a lot more on the outcomes the processes more than the outcomes. So rather being concerned about, the scoreline or how many goals they scored or didn't score, it actually starts to shift that to a lot more kind of performance outcome based, where they're focused on how many times they have scanned before receiving it, or how many times they've used their left foot as opposed to the right foot. And it gives them those goals that are set there that not only are going to be attainable and hopefully motivational, but ultimately it's going to help that player maximise their potential and work on either strengths to make stronger or areas that they want to then obviously get better in because they see it as a perceived weakness or area or an area for development. So for me, that's a massive thing. It makes the parent feel empowered as well. It makes them part of the process. And it also helps educate the parents about you as a coach or a football club, what your philosophies are and what you're actually trying to achieve with the time that you spend with their son or daughter within the training field. The last one that I wanted to touch upon was just the pre-activity tasks. So we spoke about earlier about role modelling, and sometimes it'd be a great exercise for players to then come up with their own simple homework tasks that they can do in the garden or they can do in the park. But what we can also then do is we can actually then create time within your training sessions that they can then actually have to then arrive at the training session. Often I've seen lots of sessions where kids will arrive 5-10 minutes early, coach is setting up, and the kids are really just mucking around. They're just kicking the ball about. There's no real emphasis on anything, which in itself can be good. A bit of downtime is great. That's a great time for socialisation, so I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But what we could do is we can maximise the time we've got, but then those little homework tasks that the players have got, can they then go and set that up on the pitch? Can they take a little corner of the pitch and work on certain things that they want to work on, what they've maybe done in their homework task to emulate, what they've seen on the TV? So can we do that, or can they work together with their buddy and create something together so it works on both of their outcomes and their goals? And that when they arrive to training, they pick out their friend and then they go and work on that together, which again I think helps foster a better positive relationship within their teammates. And also when you're having those formal meetings, that perhaps you then use that as evidence and say, well, actually, I've been working on X, Y, and Z, and I've been doing that, during training, before training, down the park, and here are some examples of me doing that. So again, that can act as a powerful tool for them, as well as giving the player a bit of leadership, a bit of autonomy, and a bit more responsibility for developing themselves. And you're just there as a coach to facilitate that learning. And obviously give guidance as well where you see appropriate. That's obviously important. If you see them doing something that you think's counterproductive, then obviously you can then try to lead the player or players down a certain path that would help them improve and do that. And indeed, if you don't have that time or luxury before sessions, then perhaps you factor time within your training session, and whether that be at the start, middle, or end, where players can then dedicate some time to it. And what that does for the players and for the parents observing it shows to them that you're prioritising the individual, that you are focusing on them and their needs and giving them appropriate time to do that, and not just as a coach focused on the technical tactical side, which often we can sometimes do as coaches. So that's all that I want to discuss today. I hope that you found that useful and meaningful, and I'm happy to obviously have any questions. My Twitter handle's down the bottom there, so if there's anything that from today that you want to discuss a little bit more or want to know a little more in detail, then I'm happy to do that. But really appreciate your time and thank you for that. And everyone take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, thank you.